was in complete command, not only of his own men, but he seemed to be of the Japanese too. And of course later on we heard of these, when I was up further north, up towards Burma and the final camps, we occasionally could get some of the very bad cases down south where they were able to operate, and there was no facilities whatever, where I subsequently finished up in a small camp called Songkurai. So here we could do nothing more than really just give whatever treatment possible as far as the tropical ulcers, beriberi and cholera were concerned. Unfortunately, it was not long after we arrived up there, and just short of the Sri Pagoda Pass, when the cholera hit us. And I can remember having had after treating the first case, which I had no doubt was cholera, I turned in about 11 o'clock at night, and suddenly I heard a bit of a commotion, and then I heard that Bruce Hunt, who was the senior medical officer of that area, came racing in, asking where on earth the doctor was, who had got cholera and had subsequently died. However, this was again, I hadn't seen Bruce for some time, but here I realised what an extraordinary man he was. He, like what's his name?
Dunlop.
Like Dunlop.
Yeah, Coates probably.
Yes. I mean, he took over control, and the commandant seemed to be quite content to let these two men control the whole ramification, all the ramifications of prisoner of war life. Hunt was. Do you want me to talk about Hunt?
Yes, please. Hunt
was an extraordinary man. I first met him soon after their arrival in Singapore, when I went down to the 2nd 13th Hospital, where I was introduced to him whilst we were having lunch. I can well remember thinking, what an arrogant man this was. I just couldn't conceive of how he could be so highly regarded medically, but it was on his arrival up in Songkurai, it soon became apparent that he was quite out of the ordinary. His handling of the troops was extraordinary too. They would listen to him, whatever Hunto said, that was the law. He bullied them, he forced them to eat, he carried on day and night. His energy seemed to be just non-ending. To be able to work with a man like this type was quite an extraordinary thing. As far as I was concerned, being quite a young graduate, and I can well remember whenever he left the camp to go to visit one of the others, as soon as he turned his back there'd be trouble. But usually it was settled down, but altogether being able to work with this man was one of the outstanding events of my life.
And did you have any contact with any of the other medical officers up there, like Peter Hendry, John Taylor, Roy Mills?
Yeah, so well, I was lucky in as much as when Bruce arrived that night, he brought with him John Taylor, who was an old friend of mine, and
Pete Hendry?
No, not Pete. Pete didn't come. I met Pete later on.
Vic Brand?
No, I think it was just John Taylor, and just the two of them, and eventually Cole Yutner came and joined us.
Oh.
They were a tower of strength during the cholera epidemic. It was the whole episode was quite unusual, one of course we'd never experienced before. We were aided and abetted by some of the troops who had to turn round and act as nurses. And in one stage, I can well remember, we had lost some of our own men doing this work, and we asked the English camp just south of us if they could supply us with any help. They sent 12 men up who volunteered, and unfortunately 6 of these men died with cholera nursing our troops, the Australian troops. Then when the cholera had died down, unfortunately we found the Indians and Chinese that had been ordered out by the Japanese to help build this railway line arrived, and this set up the second episode we had of cholera. It's a most unfortunate result. I don't know, I would have no idea how many of the natives died as a result of their building this line. It is said that each sleeper represented one life.
Did you have any experience of the Indian medical services?
Subsequently I moved when the condition had settled down in Songkurai. I was moved further north to Songkurai, which was a British camp. It was quite done. There I met Pete Hendry, who arrived a short time before I had. The British services, medical services, were quite extraordinary. In this camp, most of the work and all was carried out by 2 Indian medical officers. Whether they were actual medical graduates, I don't know. They had a term for them. Do you know what?
No, I don't.
They were warrant officers, virtually warrant officers. Now these 2 men, one was James and the other one was Wolf, I think, yeah. They were just extraordinary men. I have the greatest admiration for them. They took the full responsibility for all the illness as far as the British troops were concerned in this camp.
Were there any of our medical orderlies that come to mind?
Well, again, yes, I mentioned those English medical. There were some others. One was Ken Marshall, was one of my own. The men that worked with me was Ken Marshall, who was an extraordinary man, a wonderful, kindly fellow, and he would wait till I came down from the Cholera Hill, whether it be 10, 11 o'clock at night, and he would always have a little fire going, and the first thing he'd do is take what boots, or what I had left of boots, and he would insist on putting those in the hot coals just to burn, and he'd always have some boiling water there for me to have a good wash down. I think perhaps he was, may well have saved my life in that way. But he was certainly a great help. There were a number of others, but the extraordinary, I couldn't to admire these Australian troops and the British troops